Hey everyone, it's Patch 3.20 for Necropolis, and the league is just about to start in a few hours from this video being posted. I wanted to go over a few things before the league started, such as my plans for this league, what I'm going to be doing at league start, what you can expect out of me over the next few days as the league is going, giving people a loot filter, as well as just telling people about my loot filter in general. And at the same time, I also wanted to clarify a few things for people so that everyone was on the same page. So first off, why don't we start off with that clarification? It seems that over the past few days, quite a lot of people have been massively misunderstanding the B-roll that I've been showing people for the Splitting Steel Trickster. Now, out of all this, there has been one fair criticism, and I will say this has been my bad, simply due to me not understanding other people's path of buildings and where they've been putting their less damage multiplier. But the path of building was missing a 61% less damage multiplier for return projectiles, which we've now added. The other thing that a lot of people have also been criticizing was that the B-roll showcased in the original build guide was simply just doing not enough damage. I did try to clarify this 2 minutes into the video, but I don't think it really stated my points well enough. And I also tried to put a pinned comment, but it really does seem like people just straight up ignore the comment. The showcase of the build that happened in the background as I was talking about everything related to the build guide was a hardcore character that was unbelievably scuffed in comparison to what you would be putting together in softcore. Not only was that build missing things such as Wrath because I was using Purity of Elements due to me being afraid of ailments and not dying in hardcore, but at the same time I straight up just did not have enough chromes to be able to put a 4th socket on my gear to put a totem, which would give me another 20% boss DPS. Not only that, but the build was using a Chevron's Revelation just because I wanted to have more EHP instead of doing more damage, and the build was just missing an Anathema, which has been historically a 20C popular item at the start of a season, which I can expect every single person to actually have before you'd get to the showcase material in said video, such as Guardians. Not only that, but that build is also missing a Voice of Storms. Now, I can see Voice of Storms being a little bit more expensive than expected this season due to the fact that it's going to be a very popular item. But with that said, it won't be more than 5 to 10 div at most. It'll cradle pretty quickly to a stable price of around maybe 2 to 3 divs after maybe 3 to 4 days of the league going by. Now, Voice of Storms and that specific path of building would have almost doubled my DPS when combined with an actual good annoyance, as the showcase path of building was straight up not using an annoyance, as again I was too poor at hardcore to even afford one. Lastly, this was done on a 5 link with Thunderfist, as this character was fully built around Affliction and the utilization of Oath of Damage to get substantially more energy shield and evasion rating to be a lot tankier. Now yes, Oath of Damage was worth about 20% of my DPS, but if I simply just didn't use Thunderfist and instead just use a proper 6 link, I would have gotten somewhere around 40% additional DPS from having additional support in the build. Now, when we would account for the Oath of Damage loss, this still means it was another 20% DPS that was just completely left on the table, as I would highly expect you to have a 6 link by the time you go and do Guardians. Sure, there's a few builds that could do Guardians at a 5 link or 4 link, but comparing almost pretty much any builds to something like Penance Brand or DD isn't really fair, as those builds are just, well, unbelievably strong. I've seen a lot of people be afraid of this build being bait or this build not being strong. In my opinion, I feel like it's going to be completely fine. This build is completely centered around you doing 2 to 3 hours of heist at the start of the season to farm yourself 100 to 200 chaos, which would then be more than enough to afford gear that would happily boost you all the way to red maps with no issues. And for that point, it'll be more than strong enough from all the testing I've done to do pretty much any farming strategy you'd like to do at the start of a season, to make more money, to be able to afford things such as Voice of Storms, and then basically have 0 issues with doing invitations and with doing pretty much any sort of other mid-game content that you might want to do. Realistically, a lot of this is probably my fault, as I shouldn't have showcased the build in hardcore. I thought that people would appreciate if I mentioned that all the showcasing was done in hardcore with a hardcore variation of the build that was substantially weaker than it should have been. Realistically, what I should have done was showcase this build in softcore with things such as an Anathema and without a ring that basically had no useful stats on it, which I would pretty much expect everyone to be replacing by the time they do Guardians. And if I did that along with a 4 link, along with having an extra gem socket so I could put an essential totem, along with having a Wrath and all the other things that you would very much so have at the point of doing Guardians. The only thing I wouldn't include is Voice of Storms, as we don't know the price of it, but I would effectively have, when you include all the other items together, around 2 to 3 times more DPS in Showcase. I think if I did that and I showcased the build in softcore as the proper setup, people wouldn't have as much issue with the build as they did. Moving on from there, let's talk about what Necropolis is going to look like. Now, I've had a lot of people ask me this question, as I think a lot of people are new to the way Allie league start guides are being done, but as we move forward into Necropolis, a few days into season, I'll be releasing a mid-game guide on this that's going to talk about all the mid-game upgrades you'd want to make and how to make this stronger, along with a whole Wikipedia article on how to put all this together and a crafting guide and everything. And then towards the end of week 1 or maybe around halfway through week 2, there will be an endgame setup that's going to talk about how you would put in a Mage Blood and a Nimbus and all the other super endgame items and how you would scale this build into the hundreds and hundreds of divs. As for my plans for the league, I am personally going to be rushing invitation farming, followed up with Uber Elder carries. I'm going to be doing doing all of it with this build, and I'm going to be doing party play this season as I've had friends asking to play with me, and I've not done party play in quite a few seasons, while at the same time being very excited to do party play with this build as we are going to be playing with a Mana Guardian. Mana Guardian is typically a support you don't realistically see in a 2-man setup, as typically almost every build wants an Aura Bot instead of a Mana Guardian, but just due to the way this build works, a Aura Bot is weaker than a Mana Guardian, while at the same time with us having a plan to rush all the way to bossing and doing Uber Elder carries as our first major farming strategy with this, it's better for us to play a Mana Guardian than it is to play an Aura Bot. Now, the final thing to mention here is going to be the loot filter. I've had a lot of people ask me about this, and yes, there will be a loot filter for this build. I'm trying to get this video out as soon as I can today before the release of the season, and in the description below, there will be a link to my account where you can follow my filter, and then it'll auto-update in-game for you as I update mine throughout the season. And there will also be a link for Filter Blade, which you can go to make a copy of my filter and change it as much as you'd like. As soon as this video goes out, the link won't be available as Filter Blade is currently down and being worked on, but as soon as Filter Blade is up, I'll update the description with the Filter Blade link so you can go get yourself a copy of this. My filter will have all the bases and all the proper socket colors that you'd want to see while leveling, and for endgame, it'll just be my normal typical endgame filter that I always update pretty much daily and change it at a whim. I will want to mention that I would highly recommend if you're a newer player to get a copy of my filter rather than to use the auto-updating version of it, as I tend to hide things off of it very quickly, and I tend to progress substantially faster than the majority of players, meaning that I could potentially be removing things such as alchemies before you are ready to stop seeing alchemies, just because I'm at a progression point where I'd rather not see raw alchemy drops anymore, and I'd rather, for example, just buy them off of other people if I need more alchemies. But if you're a more advanced player, it should be just fine to follow my filter, and I should be removing things off the filter, as you should be getting around the progression points where you don't need to see X and Y currency anymore, or X and Y low value drops that would simply just slow you down if you attempt to sell them. With all put together, cuties, I am excited for the season, and I'm excited to play this build along with everyone else. I have full confidence in it, as I personally don't play bad builds. I always have very lofty goals for week 1. In the case of this week 1, I plan to make around 10 mirrors, as we have quite a lot of few mirror crafting projects I'd like to get done in week 2. And because of that, I simply would not be playing a build that I do not have confidence in not being able to obtain said goals. I'm really sorry for all of the miscommunication, and I'm sorry that I decided to showcase this build on a hardcore setup. I realize now I should have just showcased this in the proper non-scuff version of it that I think people would have appreciated more and wouldn't have had such a big issue with. As well, like I said, the build was missing at the minimum a 20C item that would more than double your damage on bosses. My final thing to say on all this, cuties, is play the build if you want to. Don't play the build if you don't want to. There's plenty of other good build guides out there, but I'm personally going to have a lot of fun with the build, and I'm excited to theory craft this build further with people as we add in all the new things that are going to be coming with Acropolis, and I'm excited to make this build into the best build I possibly can. I'm also going to be streaming all this on Twitch every single day, and I'll be live for probably around 12 plus hours for the first few days this season, so feel free to come by Twitch and watch any of this live or ask any questions you have there as well. With that said, I hope you kitties enjoy your league start. I hope you have fun, and I'll see you all in the follow-up videos post-launch where we talk about new farming strategies, upgrades for this build, and all the fun things that we discover.